Okay, folks, how are we doing today? So, welcome to the live stream. This is Writestream number 5, I think. And due to some requests, continuing requests, I'm going to talk a little bit today about self-publishing. And the theme that I want to start with is don't get fleeced. This is very important because what has happened in the independent publishing world over the last couple years is the profitability has shifted from putting out books in a growing market to collecting money from authors, essentially monetizing the writing portion of it rather than monetizing the reader portion of it. And I want to talk a little bit about that today and how a writer that's looking to publish independently can avoid losing money, because it's actually not that hard to lose money. It's hard to make money, but it's actually not that hard to avoid losing money. And that's probably one of the best things you can do for profitability in any business. If there's something you can avoid that makes you lose money, that's the first thing you should get rid of, rather than always seeking to figure out how to make the most money. If you eliminate enough costs, it's easy to be profitable and not even be doing a great job as far as meeting market demand. So that's one thing that I think is very important. I'm going to answer a question right away because someone dropped in. They have to go. Cody Pinnon, I guess, has to go milk his cows. He's a farmer. I grew up, of course, in agriculture, and I think the farmer mindset is a very good thing for developing great work habits and a good work ethic, which will transfer in anything that you choose to do, whether it's writing, whether it's sports, whether it's bodybuilding, whether it's fixing cars, whatever you choose to do with your life. If you have a good, consistent work ethic and don't shirk your chores, it's pretty easy to get things done over the long term. So here's the question. What are your thoughts on the toxic YouTube writing community? I have no thoughts on it because I don't really interact with it. But I have a feeling that some of the things that I'll say today may interact with it on some level, because one of the things that I notice out there in the writing sphere is there's lots of writers who sell what I call author services, and that's one of the cautionary things that I want to talk about today. So before I get into basically four big topics that I want to talk about today and a bunch of subtopics within those, let me see if there's any questions. If you have a question, go ahead and ask it right now, and I'll see if I can get to it. I'm not seeing any questions right now, so just put them in there and I'll get to them as I go through the topics. So today's topic is don't get fleeced. I said in the intro, the real money these days is in selling services to authors, not selling fiction to readers, meaning the monetization is in selling things to authors so that they can get their book out into the world and hopefully have people buy it and read it, rather than making fiction books or even nonfiction books. It applies for both. Making books and then putting them out into the world and having people buy them and having that be profitable. Let me say before I begin, I don't sell any author services. So any of the things that I'm talking about today, I don't sell. And one of the reasons I don't sell them is that is what I'm talking about today, is that I'm not interested in monetizing other people's endeavors as writers, like siphoning money off from them. If you want to give me a couple dollars on PayPal or something as a donation because my content has been helpful, that's great. But what I'm talking about here is like high dollar stuff. There's a lot of milking that happens of authors, and a lot of people that get into this business are told, because I think there's a lot of maybe it's part of this YouTube writing community or something. There's a lot of people out there that tell them they have to buy a bunch of different things. They have to pay for a bunch of different crap before they can get their book out into the market and have people reading it. And that's not really true. And I want to get into some of the nuances of that. So I don't sell any of the services. So I don't have any particular skin in the game. And that's one of the principles I'll talk about, which means my opinion is going to be a pretty honest one. And I also do practice what I preach. So I want to get into that a little bit. So the first one under this big topic, the real money is in selling services to authors, not selling books to readers. If you sell one service to an author, it's the equivalent of selling hundreds or even thousands of books to readers. And it's very difficult to sell thousands of copies of a book. In some categories on Amazon, you could sell a few hundred copies and have a bestseller. So the temptation there, the reason that that's a big deal, is that it's less work to sell an author service than it is to write a book. So if you're able to sell an editing service for $1,000 or even $500, it's quite difficult to make $500 from selling a book, and it's a lot less work to edit. So what you see is a lot of writers moving into offering additional services for other writers, especially writers that are a little bit less experienced or don't have a lot of experience in the publishing game. They sell them services for hundreds of dollars, sometimes thousands of dollars, in order to make up for the fact that they're not making any money on their own fiction books. Or even if they may have a bestseller in a category, selling one service to one author may make more money for them than that bestseller does. And that's just reality. That's the way that it's turned out. We have the market for readers is not really getting bigger unless you're in audiobooks. And that's actually something that I'll be trying to get into in 2019 a little bit more heavily. But it's not really getting bigger, but there's more authors entering the space. There's more diversification of genres. There's more genreification than ever before. So it's really harder to make a living doing this kind of thing than it was before. So that's one of the things. That's an incentive. You have an incentive for authors to get their skin in the wrong game, to stop having their skin in selling books and have it in selling things to authors. And when they sell something to authors, there's often not skin in the game. So that's number one. Number two, it's a low risk endeavor. You get a paycheck basically no matter what when you sell a service to an author. So if you're selling an editing service, if you're selling proofreading, if you're selling a publishing service, if you're selling a cover or a promotion service, all of that, there's no feast or famine in that. When you publish a book, it could be no one reads it and you don't make any money on it, and it's famine. It could be that you put a book out and it's huge, it's a bestseller, and you make a lot of money on it. But for most people, it's really hard to make the same amount of money than what I talked about in number one. It's hard to make the same amount of money that you get selling a service. So it's a low risk. And if you sell a service to an author and his or her book does poorly, it's probably not your fault if you sell a service, but certainly you get paid anyway. So you don't really have a downside to doing it. It's a low-risk endeavor. And people tend to gravitate towards low-risk endeavors just in general. People are always looking to mitigate risk, because why would you take a risk for, have a high-risk thing where you're probably not going to make a lot of money, but you might make a lot of money, versus you're guaranteed a certain amount of money. It's why people pick jobs that are very secure, jobs that have salaries and things like that. So it's a low-risk endeavor. Number three is that it's a low time investment compared to writing a book. So editing a book takes less time than writing a book. And a lot of marketing services can be automated. So if you're paying someone to advertise your book, they set up the automation for that and then they're done. It could be a couple hours of work, and then they collect your money and then use some of it to advertise or to do the promotions, and just keep the rest. Like, it could be very, very low amount of work for the amount of money that you get back. So it's a low time investment. It's less time investment than writing and bringing a book to completion. And then there's a high demand for services, because there's a lot of authors entering this market, a lot of people that are inexperienced, and they come out into the internet looking for info. That's how lots of people have ended up on my channel. Maybe they watched a Star Wars review. They found out I write. They found out I do lots of videos on book analysis and movie analysis. And they're like, well, will you edit my book? I get a lot of people that come and email me, hey, how much would you charge to edit a book? And the answer is I don't do that. And I don't do that for the reasons that I'm talking about in this video. But there's a lot of demand for that. There's a lot of demand for people to pay somebody for a service to do something they don't know how to do, rather than to learn to do it themselves, or because they're just new in it and there's a lot of people trying to sell those services. So that's the big thing. That's why we have this. I'd like to talk about number two, the second big area, which is 4 principles that I think should guide you as an author if you're looking to publish independently, to sift out the bad deals from the good deals, the bullshit from the stuff that is not bullshit. Because if you don't have a good inbuilt BS detector, and a lot of us do not, I tend to have a pretty good one. Maybe it's because I was raised by an economist that just kind of went with the shrewdness. My early business experiences were all with really hard ass, like Armenians and Jews. These guys were like born to do business, and they had very, very high-level detection BS detectors and never got taken for a ride. And so they taught me a lot of things with my early business experiences that I've learned to emulate. And I've also learned a lot of things through my own failings in business, as far as getting duped, as far as losing money, as far as getting a situation where people don't pay you, knowing who to deal with and stuff. So I've learned a lot of those lessons the hard way by losing money. When it comes to publishing, I haven't learned a lot of them the hard way, but I have lots of friends in this business and they learn the hard way. And because I tend to be very cautious and keep my nose dry, I tend to not fall for these particular things. And these 4 principles help me avoid getting taken for a ride on some of this stuff. So first one is the investment principle. The investment principle is, I'll answer some questions in just a second, guys. As far as particular stuff like what format to publish in first, I'll answer that in just a minute. Let me talk about these 4 principles. First one is investment principle. So the investment principle is basically where you look at anything that you're paying for as an investment that's expected to return dividends. So if you're paying for a service, if you're paying for someone to edit your book, how does that investment pay off? Will the editing of the book cause you to sell more books? And if it causes you to sell more books, will it sell enough books to pay for the expense of editing? Or how long and how many books, or how long will it take for you to sell the number of books necessary to recoup the investment? So one of the things about return on investment is not just what's the ROI, but what's the ROI over time? It's always a function over time. If it takes 5 years to pay off the editing service, it's probably a pretty bad deal. And the truth is, for most author services, as I go through some of them, the truth is most of them have a really bad ROI. They're a bad investment. They don't pay for themselves. Something like editing may cause you to sell 0 more books. You don't have an alternative. You don't have like an alternate world necessarily to test this unless you launch a book without editing and then edit it and launch it again. And you can see how much people like it different or how many extra copies it sells. But the truth is, it's all about selling copies. And so if you don't sell any extra books, then the service was not worth it. Or if you sell extra books, but it's less than what you'd get if you hadn't done the service, or you make less money than what you would have gotten if you hadn't gone the service, then it's a bad investment. And then if it does make a little bit of money and the investment pays for itself, then you have to figure out how scalable it is. But in a lot of cases, the investment doesn't pay for itself, with some exceptions that I'll get into. Number 2 is the skin in the game principle. Skin in the game is a way of figuring out if somebody is likely to be duping you or not, whether they have skin in the game. So in the writing business, if somebody shares in your upside, they should also share in your downside. Actually, this is true in any business. So if you get into business with somebody and they share in the upside, they should also share in the downside. That's skin in the game. So if you have an agent and you're going to traditionally publish, that agent, the better the deal the agent gets for you, the more money the agent gets for you, the more money the agent has. The more books you sell, the more money the agent gets. If you do well, the agent does well. If the agent fails to do well for you, he doesn't do as well. He has skin in the game. He shares in both the upside and he shares in the downside. So agents actually have skin in the game. Whereas a lot of the times when you're out in the independent publishing world, because these services are paid for on a fee-by-fee basis, meaning it's not a percentage of what you're selling, but rather a flat fee, the person doing it doesn't have skin in the game. So an editor charges $1,100 for editing, or maybe $500 if they're this is something I see on Twitter, by the way, is a bunch of people that are writers are like, hey, I'm available to edit books, which says to me that they're just looking for money. They're looking to do something for money. They're not going to have any skin in the game, because if they do a good job and you sell a lot of books, then they have their fee. And if they do a bad job and you sell no books, then they still get their fee. So they get their fee no matter what. It's a no skin in the game kind of thing. So if there's no skin in the game, you need to be extra cautious. It doesn't mean never, and I'll talk about some examples, but if there's no skin in the game, or the skin in the game is very small, where it's like, I want to do a good job so that I get more business later on, that's still skin in the game, but it's less than what an agent would do, where they get an actual percentage of how well you do. So that's number 2, skin in the game. Number 3 is what I call the necessity principle. This is just asking yourself how necessary something is. Is a thing necessary? If it isn't necessary, you don't need to do it. If it's marginally necessary, then you can make a value judgment. Just as an example, or an analogy. If you want to sell a car, it is necessary for the car to have an engine. It is not completely necessary for the car to have an air conditioner. However, it's really nice if the car has the air conditioner. People would be more likely to buy the car if it has an air conditioner, so you may want to put an air conditioner in it. But certainly you can never sell a car without an engine. So necessity isn't a zero thing, 0 or 1. It could be any kind of range in there. But you have to figure out how necessary it is. For instance, having your book be formatted properly is a necessity, because otherwise it won't be readable. Having your book in the English language, if you're trying to publish it in the United States or in Greater Britain or whatever, that's a necessity as well. What's not a necessity would be, say, making the chapter headings look really beautiful and figuring out how to code that. That's not really a necessity. So you can rate it a lot lower, whether you should spend your time or money on it. And the fourth one, this is just a question. What are the alternatives? So whenever somebody is trying to sell you something, you should ask, what are the alternatives to this particular service, both in terms of price, other people's prices, or just doing it yourself or learning to do it, things like that. So those are the big 4 principles: investment principle, skin in the game, the necessity principle, and what I call alternatives, or what are the alternatives. Before I get on to the next one, talking about some of these services that I think have the potential to fleece a lot of people, let me look at the chat and I'll answer some questions. So somebody said, Jake Ueda says, thanks for doing the vids. I like doing the videos. Thanks for watching them. What do you think of publishing in a digital format first? That's what I did originally. I always started with digital and then did paperback later. Most people will say the money's in ebooks, but I sell a lot of paperbacks, so I try to do both at the same time. And I find that there's actually a value proposition that occurs with the ebook and the paperback. So if you have the paperback on sale for $10 and then you have the ebook on sale for $2.99, somebody can make a really easy value judgment as to whether they want a physical copy or whether they just want the ebook. And you can actually sell a more expensive ebook, in my experience, if you have a paperback that accompanies it. So there's an easy business decision, and it's always just good to have options. But there's nothing to say you can't do digital first. I know lots of different authors, and sometimes bigger authors, that do digital first. Fox Day's last book was, in fact, most of his books start as digital, and then the paperback comes later. And there's some reasons for that, mainly that he relies on his readership to catch some of the typos. And so if you catch the typos before you actually put it in a physical book, which you can't edit after the fact, that's nice. Of course, now Amazon doesn't live update book files anymore, so everyone who buys it on launch day has the typo version. Everyone who buys it later has the clean version. I've been dealing with that as well as time goes on. Let's see if there's some others. I've been trying to write a book recently. This is from Garrett. I'm at 3,000 words. I have written idea books that I got to 20,000 words, but that was a 2-day write-a-thon that I never took further. This new one, I'm taking it slow, like 400 to 500 words a day. That's good. That's great. If you can do it daily, you'll find that eventually it's easier. Not only that, but the 500 words in the same amount of time will eventually turn into 1,000, meaning you'll just get more and more efficient at doing your work, as long as you can be consistent with every day. When I'm doing drafting, I find the first 5,000 words are really easy. The second 5,000 are harder. Then it gets harder and harder, and in the same amount of time I write less, and then it just keeps getting more and more efficient to where I could sit down and like in an hour I could write 2,000, 3,000 words if I really know what I'm doing. So as you continue to do it, you'll get more efficient, and you'll find that the book's finished before you know it in some cases. Do you still work with other authors to market and whatnot? I do not work with other authors. That's one of the things about this stream. I don't sell any. I'll give you advice for free, but I will not sell you any kind of services. And when I've tried to help people, when they've tried to hire me doing stuff, It doesn't usually work out because lots of people have a different idea of what they imagine me doing for them and what they need rather than what they actually need, as an outsider. And so I don't do it anymore. I don't, and I've never really done editing. It's mostly like, if I've done script doctoring for someone or something like that. Usually clients have an idea of what they imagine what you're going to do, which is different than what you're trying to do. So it's just, for me, I just prefer to stay clear of it. And likewise, I wouldn't, for a fee, I don't really have skin in the game. So I'm not going to do as good a job as if it's my work and I actually care about it. So with that, let's talk about some of the services that you're likely to have people sell you. And this is something, I think with some people in the author community, what they tend to do is they put out a lot of videos on writing, and then they sell something which they attract kind of newer writers, I'll say. And once they attract newer writers, then they sell them on one of their services. And the big one's editing. So the first big service that people sell is general editing. This is where another person looks over your work and suggests a variety of changes for a fee, usually a flat fee. And the usual focus is storytelling and execution, also dialogue to a certain extent. And so what the service that they're trying to sell is, I'm going to read your book, I'm going to pick it apart, I'm going to tell you all the things that are wrong, and you fix those, and it'll make your book better. The problem with editing services is that they don't compute into sales. So the first principle, investment principle, having a book be edited doesn't mean it's going to sell better. And that's just how it is. And if you don't believe me, as I talk about some of these, think about some of the best-selling books of recent years or throughout all time. Tolkien didn't really have an editor, right? Like the stuff published posthumously is edited by Christopher Tolkien, but that's because Tolkien hadn't finished editing the manuscripts himself. So the revisions were done by somebody, his son. It was actually someone who has a lot of skin in the game. But he didn't have an editor. If you read something like Twilight, if you think your average editor who's a good writer would have let Twilight get put on the presses the way that it's written? Open it up and read it sometime. It's not well written. It's successful for things that are part of what makes the book accessible and interesting for people, not because of the technical execution of how the story's done. So good editing or bad editing would not have changed how Twilight did. In fact, it might have made Twilight just an obscure, unknown book. So the editing might have actually hurt its sales. Likewise, if you were to read something like The Hunger Games is written in like this weird present tense that's almost unreadable. And any editor worth their spit would have looked at this and been like, this cannot be published like this. You need to rewrite this in a tense that people are used to, or no one will read it. Well, they would have been completely wrong because people ended up reading it. You can look at lots of stuff that sells well despite editing. And I've read numerous books where people thank their editors, and it's clear that the editor didn't do any kind of editing job in the book. That he suggested some garbage for them to change, for the author to change, and the author might have done it and thought that they were getting a good deal, but the end result was like bad. And bad in ways that are really technically bad. For instance, there's a book series that my wife likes, and I'm not going to mention which one because I'm basically going to say something negative about it, and those authors didn't do anything to me, and so I won't say anything negative about them. But one of the things, it's written by two authors, and one of the things they do is after dialogue, they will often communicate what that character was feeling. So the character would say something, he's like, "Who are you to tell me what to do?" And he'd be like, Jim felt very angry at Elsa, right? So it just would say these feelings after all of the dialogue. It's like, you don't do that. In fact, it's really annoying and awkward when you try to read it. And any editor that understands style, has ever cracked like the E.B. White book, would look at that and be like, you need to cut all of this out. The editing job would be something that I would have been embarrassed to say I edited it. But I see lots of books like that. And I've known lots of authors that they're like, I paid this editor all this money and they barely suggested any changes. And then all my readers came back with the feedback for the stuff that I actually needed to change. So so that's the other thing. So it's not a good investment. The editor does not have skin in the game. They collect their fee whether they're good or bad, and it's like, see you later. And if you think that they're a bad editor and you don't use them again, well, chances are most authors are only using that editor one time, right? The repeat business is very, very low. If you're selling to newbie authors, how many books do you expect to be editing from them? Do you expect to be editing like 10 or 20? No, you expect to edit one. So doing a good job it doesn't even really matter. And then doing a good job is all perception because it doesn't translate into book sales. And then the necessity principle. Is it necessary? The answer is no. I've answered that. So general editing is not necessary for most people. And it's not a 0-1 necessity. The necessity might be very low if you're a brand new author, it's the first book you've written, and you really don't know how to gather feedback except to hire an editor. But there are other ways to do it. So the last one, what are the alternatives? Well, rather than having an editor give you feedback, if you're a new author, you can join author groups. There's a lot of them out there where people agree to read each other's stories and give feedback on it, and you can learn a lot that way. And that's kind of a mutual exchange of time. You spend some of your time reading somebody else's books, and then they spend time reading your books. And you have somebody else who's in the craft that can say, hey, I noticed you did this here, and I don't think it's very effective. Or, that's not really like appropriate style, I think, for what you're doing. You could get a lot of different feedback like that. That's really helpful when you're first starting out. And as you get more experienced, like right now where I am at the game, I just don't know a whole lot of what authors would tell me that I don't already know. As far as if I were to hand something off to them and they're like, I don't like this style element. I'm like, I chose to do it. Like, I don't do things that I don't choose intentionally. Like, I intentionally choose the things I do in my books. So if someone points it out, I'm like, it's a choice I made. What's your point? That would probably be my reaction to most things. So it's not necessary. Let's keep going here on some of the other services. The second one is copy editing. Copy editing is where you're editing specifically for style. So the complaint I had earlier was really a style complaint. Copy editors, it's a cheaper service. It's more necessary for people who are writing nonfiction and people who are writing academic papers to use copy editors because there's specific styles of writing that are necessary for specific audiences. However, copy editors, and this is straight from Nassim Taleb, who wrote the book Skin in the Game. They have no skin in the game. He does not like copy editors because of some of these reasons. They have just a need to justify their job. So anytime he hands something to a copy editor, the way he knows if a copy editor is good is they have the fewest number of suggestions. He said, I found one copy editor who caught the only actual typo in there, which was the wrong date. I put in the wrong date for one of my data points. That was the only significant thing that needed to be changed in his paper. But all the other copy editors, they say you should change this, you should change that. And different copy editors, he did an experiment. Different copy editors all suggested different things, which means there's no standard that they're appealing to. That's just them having an opinion and trying to convince you that their opinion is worth the money that they're paying. They're paying for the service, or you're paying for the service. So copy editing, likewise, is it necessary? For most people, it's not necessary unless you're in one of those areas where you're writing something very, very academic and you really need somebody who has academic expertise to double check your copy, or you just don't have a lot of experience writing in that. So if you're writing a highly academic nonfiction book, a copy editor might be appropriate, but you should have some caution knowing that they don't have any skin in the game. And what are their alternatives to copy editing? Well, it's doing it yourself, or again, using author groups. So there's lots of alternatives to that. So editing is making revisions to an already completed and proofread book. No, not necessarily proofread. Usually proofreading is the last step that you do. So editing is you've completed the manuscript. That's what the working is. Next one, proofreading. So proofreading is the next one. Proofreading is just looking for typos. Proofreading is one of the things that is actually probably pretty necessary, because if you have too many mistakes, then it disrupts the readability of what you're doing there. So it's fairly necessary to get rid of most of your typos if possible. What I've tended to do in the past is I put the book out pretty early to my mailing list and say, hey, if you catch typos, find them. And during that time, I'm also catching typos. I'm rereading and catching typos. And then I put out the final version. I'm probably not going to do that in the future, simply because my relationship with my audience is, I don't want to call it antagonistic, but it's a little bit more like I've put out early copies to people, and then they've reviewed it on Amazon based on the typos that were in that early copy. Like they knocked stars off of it. And I'm like, well, why would I give, why would I give you anything less than something that's perfectly edited, like perfectly proofread, if people are going to be knocking stars off. So there may not be very many early review copies from now on, because I've gotten kind of burned on that by readers. But early on, it was a great way to do it. Is I could put the book out a couple weeks early. People would read it, they'd give feedback. I changed some things right before I published it. Especially, and sometimes people gave feedback like, I didn't understand what was happening at this part in this chapter. I'm like, well, let me take a look at that. And I'd like, I could see where that could be confusing, and I would rewrite it. And I would be doing rewrites like right up to the end, because that's kind of how I am. And then fixing typos. And then there's always typos that go out. And then you fix them a little bit later on. So that's kind of the alternatives to proofreading. A proofreader won't catch all the typos, and that's an expectation that you shouldn't have. So if you hire a proofreader, there's still going to be typos. They'll just be fewer than if you didn't proofread it at all. And you do need human eyes to look at something rather than relying on something like your spell check. Your spell check will catch a lot of errors, but that's like first thing you do is like a spell check and check all that stuff. Then you want humans to read it, because humans will find the weirder things that a computer is not really able to see. So proofreading, you don't have to hire people to do it, and you can do a lot of it yourself. It's just spending your time doing it. But usually for a standard fee, like they don't need a whole lot of skin in the game. They just need to proofread, and they kind of, maybe they want a lot of business. It's low risk, but it's also low effort and low cost usually to have proofreaders. A couple of $100. A couple $100 can be a lot, but it can be less than a lot of the other services people pay for. So I don't really hire proofreaders. I try to do it all myself, again, to try to keep my costs as low as possible. But you can make your decision there. Formatting is another service. This one's usually pretty cheap. We're talking tens of dollars. Like people will charge $50 or maybe $20 on Fiverr. If you go to like Fiverr, you can find people that do it for almost nothing. They'll format your ebook for $5, right? If you don't know how to format your ebook, then you can hire someone to do it, and that is a necessity. Your ebook must be properly formatted and be readable. If you don't have the right formatting, which is justified paragraphs, an indent of about 0.2, chapter headings, functional table of contents, all that stuff, if you don't have that stuff working, then people are not going to read your book, or they're going to be put off by formatting problems. In fact, I've mentioned, back before I wrote books, I mentioned formatting problems in reviews, and it's something that sometimes it's hard to fix because there's different versions of the Mobi files that come out. So, but yeah, that's a necessity. But usually it's very low expense. So if it's a necessity and it's low cost, you shouldn't feel that bad about hiring someone to format your book or format your paperback. If you want to have a paperback formatted, I usually format paperbacks for my friends for free, because it's something I can do in like 20 or 30 minutes and make it look really good with premium fonts, because I have all the good fonts, and make it look really professional. And I can do it in Microsoft Word. And then they have a professionally formatted interior of their book to then hand to their cover designer to know how thick it's going to be, and their cover designer can work on it. Brings me to the next part, which is cover design and illustration. These can be two separate services. So sometimes you hire a cover designer who does everything. Sometimes you hire an illustrator who does the image if they're a painter, and then a cover designer will do all the typography on top of that. So they can be two separate services. I design my own covers. I learned how to do that, and I have graphic design experience, so it's something that I'm good. A good cover is something, if we go to those principles, an investment principle, a good cover will pay for itself over time. And a bad cover can prevent your book from selling completely. So if you have a good cover, a good, well-designed cover, it can make you a lot of money. Generally, covers, just a rule of thumb, $300 will get you a really good cover. $100 will get you a decent cover. $50 will get you an okay cover. and anything less than that, you're probably getting somebody who doesn't really know what they're doing, which is why they can't command a higher price. But in the $100 to $300 range, you're going to get a pretty good cover. So it is something that will pay for itself. The designer doesn't have skin in the game, except in that they want to continue having business, and so they want to add that great image to their portfolio to attract more authors. So they do have a little bit of skin in the game as far as their overall business, just not skin in your game, not skin in the sales of your book. But a good cover designer is something that, especially if you don't have a lot of experience with design or operating Photoshop, it's something that you should really consider as an author. It will end up paying for itself. Marketing, publication, and promotion. Before I get to that, let me see if there's any questions in the comments. You can get your questions answered before I go on. How long should my novel be before it's considered finished? It's finished when it's finished. It's finished when the plot resolves, and that's going to be the length. People want length guidelines. If you're publishing independently, you don't need to worry about that. If you're publishing traditionally, minimum's going to be somewhere around 50,000 words for any genre, but especially if you're writing like literature, what's called literary fiction, which is not a term I like, but there it is. 50,000 words is like Great Gatsby. But most of the time you want 80,000 to 100,000 words. If you're writing fantasy, 115,000 words. And those are really the upper limits. If you're writing a 150,000 word fantasy book, it might get published. I think Patrick Rothfuss managed to publish his long tome, which I would have probably refused to publish, but it did well, so I would have been the person in the wrong there. But 120,000 is probably the upper limit for that genre. And then for other genres, they want it shorter. For like detective stuff or action novels, they want it about 100,000. But if you're independent publishing, you make it as long as you want. You can make it 200,000 words, or you can make it 30,000 words. I've published novels that are 30,000 words. I've published novels that are 50,000 words. I've published novels that are 130,000 words. It just depends on what I'm doing. So it's finished when it's finished. Don't worry about the length. It's from Film Girl. I answered that one already. General editing is just a manuscript. It's not proofreading. It's more story editing. Do you ever have beta readers to read your book before publishing? I was thinking of putting out half my book to Facebook friends in a Facebook group. Thoughts? So I wouldn't bother putting out half. Like, why not give the whole thing? Might as well put out the whole thing. My beta readers are the people on my list. So if you're on my reading list, then you're on my beta reading list. But I don't hand a book to beta readers until I'm done writing it, basically. And I've learned from this past experience that I probably ought not to hand it to beta readers until like it's basically ready to be published, and then it's just early access. And the main reason is that, I've gotten punished for having unedited books or, unproofread books go out to people on the mailing list. And so you learn from that lesson not to repeat that mistake. But also, I write what I want to write. And so I'm not as interested in other people's feedback as I am. The feedback that I want is like, I didn't understand this part. So I'm not as interested in whether people liked the story as much as I am just, did they get everything that I was doing? So I always put them out early, and I do make revisions before I publish, but probably not what people do as far as beta, where they finish a draft and then they have people read a rough draft and then they get a bunch of feedback and do a bunch of revisions. I don't really do that process. And it's kind of hard to get people to do that for you. Like to read a rough draft for free. That's kind of tough to find people wanting to do that. Just my experience. The scary thought about writing a story is that after it's released, you realize or have pointed out a plot hole. Yeah. How much should you worry about plot holes in your stories? Tips on avoiding them. Ooh, that's a hard one. So yeah, you realize a plot hole. So think of explanations for the plot holes and then put them in there. There are famous books that have shipped with plot holes. One of them was the 5th Harry Potter book. I think I've mentioned this before. Shipped with a plot hole where the students mysteriously had their wands after they were taken. And it was because a wrong version of a manuscript ended up getting printed, I think, and they never really fessed up. But in other versions, basically is a one sentence correction of after they knock out Umbridge, they take their wands back from her. But that one sentence solved the plot hole. So in a lot of cases, it's just explaining what happened. It's just like, you could point it out, like, where'd you get that jacket? And it's like, oh, well, I took it off before we crash landed. It could be something like that. So you can explain them away. As far as avoiding them completely, that this more has to do with planning. How long does it usually take to edit your own book? It depends on how much time I have. If it takes 100 hours to write, it takes 15, 20 hours to edit. I don't know. I don't keep track of it that much, but I tend to work against deadlines. And so then you're like, well, it only takes a week to edit the book. And that's not really true, because other people work less in a week than I do in a lot of cases. Why would people rate a book in its proofread form and then rate it as if it were a fully finished book? You have to ask them. Spell checker only catches basic things. I have been worried about formatting because I write in Microsoft Word. I do everything in Microsoft Word. I format my ebooks and my paperbacks in Microsoft Word. It's the best word processor for that. In fact, Microsoft Word is the best one if you want to have the correct formatting when you make a PDF and when it goes out to people. It really is the best. Other ones have other features that I don't really care about, so I don't use them. I just stick with Microsoft Word, and I use a really old version of Word. I use Microsoft Word 2010. So my version of Word now is 8 years old, and it still works fine. What do you think of internal pictures if you can get them for cheap? I'm not sure how to answer that. I'm like pictures on the interior of the book. I have illustrations in some of my books. Sometimes they don't look right on an ebook because of the device that you're reading it on. Other times they look great. Just depends. They're somewhat of a liability because you don't know how they're going to look, but generally they're fine if you want to pay for them. The question is, do they help you sell more books? And the answer is usually no. It doesn't help you sell more books. I had an illustrator for Needle Ash just because I wanted to give him a job, basically. I just wanted to have some because I felt like it. And that's my justification. It was not a money-making proposition, really. It was just something fun to have in the book. So I felt like spending a little bit of money on that. What sells better, book series, trilogies, or standalone books? Right now, in indie fiction, series are where it's at as far as monetization, and that's because you continue to sell people many, many products as they read through it. So rather than selling them one standalone book to 500 people, you can sell to a fraction of those 500 people 6 books in a series. So you can have a smaller targeted reader base and sell more books if you're writing a series. So the series is usually a little bit more monetizable. I don't like to read the kinds of series that sell right now, which are they always end on a cliffhanger, nothing resolves. Because I don't like to read them, I don't write them. I write things that I like to read. And so maybe I'm not making as much money as I ought to be making, but I don't really care about that. I'm not really in this business to like make a giant amount of income. I'm in it because I like to do what I want to do. It's an artistic thing, and I will happily give up some top-end dollar amount to put out what art I think is cool. How publishable is a 50,000 word young adult fantasy? It's pretty publishable. 50,000 words, young adult fantasy, that's a lot of young adult fantasies, 50,000 words. Harry Potter's longer though. So if you're looking to compare it to something like Harry Potter, you need to be at the 100,000 word range, if not a little higher. The books for young adult readers have been getting longer. If it's 50,000 words as part of a definite series, that's even better. That's a great length. People can read it quickly. They feel good that they finished the book. Short books are great right now, actually, because readers have so many choices. If they have a book that they know that they can finish quickly and that's going to be good, they're more likely to read it than some giant tome that they're not going to be able to finish for a long time. How do you recommend How do you recommend someone studying a story versus just turning your brain off and consuming the art? Do you ever break stories down into beat sheets? Hunter S. Thompson copied The Great Gatsby over. And do you think there's any validity to that way of studying? Okay, so let's go through each one of those. So the first one is I've provided a lot of analysis tools on the channel. Setting, characters, plot. I tend to analyze everything as I watch it. For me, analyzing does not in any way prevent me from enjoying it. I don't see those two as mutually exclusive. So I'm usually always analyzing everything I do all the time. I have a very analytical mind. When I play a video game, I'm analyzing how it works. I'm not just like letting it wash over me and turning my brain off. My brain is never off. Even when I go to sleep, I'm thinking of stories. Even when I am asleep, I dream stories. I dream of what I'm going to say the next day. I'm constantly thinking. My brain's never off. It's one of the reasons that I don't like to watch TV. I can't stand TV. Because I can't turn my brain off and have passive input. Really baroque movies like Star Wars, there's a lot to look at. I don't have to turn my brain off to enjoy Star Wars. I can enjoy it on both levels, but usually that's not the case. So if something's good, I can analyze it and enjoy it just as much as other things. So when things are really, like, when I find them boring, it's because they require me to turn my brain off to enjoy them. I don't like to do that. I don't do beat sheets because I don't write with them, and I don't want to write with them, and I don't really like them. And I think in a lot of cases, if you're trying to do a beat sheet, you're trying to force a format. Hunter S. Thompson copied The Great Gatsby over. I don't like The Great Gatsby really as a book, and that is not a kind of book I would try to emulate if I wanted to sell books. I think it's a book that's become popular through the government forcing kids to read it. That's my opinion. I did a recent analysis on the characters in The Great Gatsby. They're all awful people, and doesn't really have much of a plot. But it's an important book to read, I guess, for knowing why people think it's important. But yeah, I don't know. I don't do beat sheets. I think about the important stuff. It's rather than looking at beats. People think of beats as plot points. It's one way to look at it. Try to think about what does what on all three of the levels: setting, characters, plot. And I think your ability to micro probably matters more than your ability to macro. I've kind of changed my mind on this as I've gotten more experience. Any tips on creating interesting monsters or creatures to inhabit and flesh out your world? Take a creature that is familiar and add something unfamiliar to it. So I did this in a book that's probably going to come out next year. Take a dinosaur and make it blind and have no eyes. And all of a sudden, it's a much more frightening thing. It's a bear, but instead of arms, it has knives, or something else, like it's been mutilated. Those are really scary thoughts. And so take the familiar and make it unfamiliar and uncanny, and you're going to have a very frightening creature. It's very difficult to do what like H.R. Geiger did with Alien and make something truly horrific and otherworldly. But even then, it's a humanoid that's been distorted. It's been sucked down so you see all the bones, but his bones are uncanny. And then there's a mouth inside of a mouth, so the tongue has a mouth on it. And then, you extend the skull. So he did a bunch of crazy things to the human form to create this alien, this bony-looking alien. But that's an extreme thing. You can take anything and make it uncanny by altering like one thing about it. So, the Steel Inquisitors in Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn, like they have these like things like in their eyes, this metal in their eyes. That's very uncanny and grotesque. And so that makes a very frightening creature. Is there a methodology for catching plot holes? I can't think of a methodology other than, is there a reason this happened? How long do you think a book should be? And how do you know if it's done? I think I answered that. It can be as long as it needs to be, depending on what's in there. So don't worry too much about length. Stephen King has written 500,000 word books and 50,000 word books. He's written the full range. It depends on the story you're writing. So don't hem yourself in and say it has to be 100,000 words. Unless you're trying to publish it traditionally and you're trying to do that right from the start. But even then, if you finish a 130,000 word book and it's good, the worst thing that could happen is you'd hand it to an agent and they'd be like, well, it should really be 100,000 words. You need to cut some words from this. That's a better position than having never written the words to begin with, I think. I'm into the 80,000 word count. Good. I still got 10 minutes before I got to teach online English language. Sweet. That's great. 80,000 words is good. That's a lot of words. All right, let me continue with some of the services. So I talked about cover design. That's something that usually pays for itself, but something you should consider as an independent publisher, unless you have skills that are specific to that area, namely graphic design and illustration skills, depending on your genre. Can't get too deep into the specifics there. We'll do that in some other videos. Marketing, publication, and promotion. This is something that can either pay for itself or not, and there's so many factors to consider that it deserves like its own treatment. But if somebody's advertising on your behalf, chances are they're going to do the same thing for every client because that's what's easiest. And so if your book fits into that mold, then you could pay someone to do it that has a lot of experience advertising, that's a specialist. But don't be surprised if the amount of sales you generate through a promotion end up being less than what you spend on advertising. Because there's lots of factors that go into that. Generally, if you're breaking even, like if you sell, if you spend $1 on advertising and sell one book, you're doing great. Usually you have to spend $1 on advertising to sell, you have to spend, if you're selling a $3 book, I'm thinking of like a $3 book. So you're making a 30% royalty, sometimes a 70%, depending on your arrangement with Amazon. But we'll go 30% because that's more common. If you sell one book at $2.99 and you spent $1 worth of advertising and clicks to get that one sell, you're breaking even. So you're doing fine. The advertising's paying for itself. If the advertising's paying for itself, or even if it's very close to paying for itself, you should probably continue doing it because the way rankings work is that if you get enough traffic on a book, eventually Amazon will want to sell the book for you. But that takes a long time. So small expenditures in advertising yield bigger results over time. Generally, if you have more books to sell, advertising is better. And if you have a series, advertising is even more effective because if you convert one of those into a sell on the first book, which that person gets hooked on the series and buys all the other ones in the series, you've multiplied the amount of money you spend on advertising manyfold. So advertising is something that, even though a promotion firm may not have a lot of skin in the game, it can pay for itself. But you should never jump into an advertising situation with anyone that sells that service with a large amount of money. You should pick an amount of money to test the waters first and see how it does. So if somebody's selling a promotion package that's like $3,000, shouldn't do that, right? They're asking for too much basically in faith. You don't want to the amount of faith that you have in a stranger should shrink depending on how much you know. If you don't know them well, you should have little faith in them. And that should go without saying. That's a basic thing. And then what's the alternative? The alternative to paying someone to publicize and promote your book is for you to do it yourself. And here's the thing. You can pay directly to advertise on Amazon. You can pay directly to advertise on Facebook. You can do all the promotion yourself 100% and do well at it. In fact, you're probably going to do maybe not as good as somebody who specializes in it, but you might do better than the difference between their take and their fee and how much they spend advertising your book. So it may end up being better for you to just do it yourself and learn some of the advertising skills that go into it. But some people just really don't like to deal with advertising and really want to farm that out. So you should be cautious of that. It's really not hard to do it yourself. So the alternative is you can do it yourself. It's not necessary to pay someone to advertise on your behalf. You can learn to do that all on your own. Another thing, sales copy. That's writing down the blurb for the book and for your ads. Some people specialize in that. Usually it doesn't cost a lot to have that done. So even though they don't have a lot of skin in the game, it's a low cost, right? So, it's not a big loss if you try that out sometime. And then you can always copy what they did if it's really good and try to do something like it, and learn that yourself, which is an alternative. Learn to do sales copy yourself. Another one, web design. So web design would be designing your website. This is something that you probably don't need to pay anyone for. If you have no idea how to design a website, you can still get just a WordPress theme that's really basic and it's going to look great. All right. So the people who program these little themes for WordPress, so get a WordPress site. You're going to have to pay for hosting. Or you can host it on WordPress.com, I think, for either low cost or for free. Or you can get a Blogger site. I started on a Blogger site. It's really easy to do Blogger and to design it so it's very clean and good looking for readers. There's still some extremely popular blogs on Blogger. So set up a website with WordPress, pick a theme that makes your content look cool, and then you have to put in the content. Don't ever hire somebody to do content for your website for you. That should be like a rule, because it's not authentic, and there's no point to it, right? Because it's not like writing for a newspaper. You're trying to get people on your website to then buy your book or know more about you and develop a relationship with them, not to have them read an article written by someone that isn't you. So don't hire people to do content. You need to put the content in your own website, write your own articles, talk about your book, write your bio. All that stuff can be done by you. If you choose to hire a web designer, be aware that each time there's new browser versions that come out, you have to pay someone to redesign your website every so often, because it breaks. Because they put in a lot of fancy looking elements that stop working as new security updates come out. So it's better to do WordPress, which is basically free. Pick a good theme and just have it. A nice, clean, good looking theme for your readers. There's really not a lot of reason to hire a web designer in the author field at this point in time. If you're selling products, that's different. But you probably don't need to do that as an author. You just need something simple. And chances are you're not selling your ebooks through some kind of shop. You're going to do it through Amazon or something like that. So that's pretty simple as well. Last one is publishing services. This is a harder one. Some people sell all-in-one publishing services. This is different from vanity publishers, and I will tell you the difference. Publishing services, you still own the book. They are not your publisher. What they do is they set everything up for you. They will hire a book cover artist. They'll offer a range of services that's part of their publication package. They may even write the sales copy for you, and they put it out. But then you're responsible for upkeeping the book. I don't usually recommend these, and that's because you can piecemeal everything out for a lot less money. The whole way that these services make money is by basically upselling you on stuff you don't need. So anything that they offer editing, you can find an individual to do each of those, or find an alternative that's cheaper. So I don't usually recommend publishing services at all, unless you're like 80 years old and you just don't want to have to learn something and you have a lot of money to flush down the toilet. Then maybe you can do those. But chances are they're going to hire a cheap cover designer because they want to keep as much money as possible. So they're not going to look at a $300 cover or a $500 cover and pay for that. You're going to get the equivalent of like a $25, $50 cover, which is going to look pretty amateur compared to other books in the genre. And that's because they want to keep as much money as possible. Now, you as an author might know from my advice that book covers are like the one thing that you should have be really good as your book cover. You should have as good a book cover as you can afford or think is possible. It's not completely critical, but it's one thing that you probably ought to have. Be pretty good. But that's something that a lot of publishing services will skimp on if they're going to be in charge of that. Likewise, why would they put a lot of money and time into editing? The point is to keep the money, not to put a lot of effort, especially once they have your money. So I don't recommend publishing services generally at all. Let me answer some questions, and then I'll tell you the stuff that you need to definitely avoid. And we're probably going to be out of time for this particular Don't Get Fleeced episode. Let's see here. I read The Great Gatsby in high school and felt it was okay. Didn't feel as it was one of the best books I ever read. Also read Catcher in the Rye in high school. From what I recall, Rye was better. I like Catcher in the Rye a lot better. But having taught Catcher in the Rye, almost nobody, and there's this is true in any kind of curriculum you get that includes it. They never talk about the stuff that's actually in Catcher in the Rye that's worth talking about, because it's not politically correct. There's this constant theme of viewing women as like sexual objects, and it's not totally appropriate to talk to high schoolers about that, but it reflects a lot on what the character is. There's a lot of stuff below the surface that kids just miss because they're not primed to think about that. Kind of like how I talked about the Virgin and the Chad. in The Great Gatsby, that you have this very clear distinction, this view of the sexual hierarchy in this very immoral area that Fitzgerald was writing about. You have this very clear presentation of that Fitzgerald himself may not have been aware of, and certainly you're never going to have an English teacher talk about how Tom Buchanan is an alpha male from the perspective of a gamma male who doesn't like alpha males and thinks that they're jerks and beat women, and he's a caricature of a bad man, and that The Great Gatsby is himself not realistic because he's a very passive beta gamma bootlegger, and he's in the bootlegging industry, which you'd have to be a real hard ass to exist in, even in the 1920s. That's organized crime. That's mafia. Gatsby should not strike you as a mafioso because he's far too passive and too wimpy to be a mafioso. So those sorts of things, you just wouldn't talk about him in high school. You get in trouble. Like if I were to teach Great Gatsby to high school kids, you get in a lot of trouble because you talk about things that are just not really appropriate for kids. And that's kind of one of the problems. Someone says, I did not catch the start of your stream, although I have notifications turned on. I'm sorry. That's how it works sometimes. Someone asked, do you mention them by brand name? Coke versus soda. I don't know. Do you think J.J. Abrams will save episode 9? No, he didn't do a good job in episode 7. So he will not save episode 9. Episode 9 will suck. I guarantee it. Is Tor the best way to get your science fiction or fantasy published? You need to go through an agent to talk to Tor. So you can't talk to Tor directly. You got to go through an agent. Tor is a big publisher, but they're also SJW converged. So depending on your political orientation and how out and open you are with it, it could be harder to publish with Tor. I wouldn't say they're a sinking ship yet, but they publish a lot of stuff that people don't seem to read, and they don't seem to publish as good as stuff as they used to. That's what I'll say. What would you recommend to someone stuck on a novel because of writing bad dialogue? Should they plow ahead and fix later or try to refine on the spot? If the dialogue is getting the job done, it's better to plow ahead and come back after you've learned the lessons about what the dialogue needs to communicate by finishing the story. It's better to plow ahead and come back and tune the dialogue later. Dialogue is the number one thing you should think about when you're revising, is making sure the dialogue is good, because it's where most of the story is. But if you don't feel like the dialogue's that solid when you're writing it, just come back to it later when you're in a better mood to think about it. It's totally okay to come back to stuff when your mind is more primed for it. I do that frequently. I'll come back and look at a scene later, even while I'm drafting, and like, oh, that's what I got, the perfect line that this character would have said here, and I'll go back and add it in. Do you mention items by brand name? I mean, writing a book. Yeah. There's no reason not to. It's not like writing a movie creating a movie where if you have a product placement with Coke, you're showing a trademarked image or something, you can absolutely mention brand names. Most authors do it. And then if there's like a movie conversion, you deal with it later. Do you have names of good publishers for new writers? You do not talk to publishers as a new writer. So I'm talking about self-publishing today. If you're going to go traditionally published, you need to find an agent, and that is a completely different process. You will send out query letters to agents. You'll find an agent to rep your book, to represent your book. They will find the publisher for you. Publishers will not talk to you as an individual unless you were writing very specific kinds of nonfiction, such as recipe books or books on like the history of the Roman Empire. And that's what that publisher publishes, right? So, as an author, you don't talk to publishers, so it doesn't matter what I think about publishers. You talk to agents, and agents will find the publisher for you. And as far as good and bad publishers, they're all going to do mostly a good job, the same job, I should say. So I don't have a lot of opinions on publishers. I would just mention Boeing 747. I don't know any authors that avoid brand names. Just put the brand names in. You made your own covers, right? Yeah. How easy was that? Seems like it could be fun. I think it's fun. I have experience with it. I am going to do some content once I get to my new house on how to design some covers and how to photocomp, how to make composite photos, which is what I have for most of my covers these days. Those tend to be what sells the best, and illustrations are more expensive, and I don't really do illustrations myself. But yeah, I do my own covers. It's fun. If you're willing to learn the graphic design basics and how to operate the software, it can be fun. If you're not artistically inclined visually, it might be an uphill battle. Sometimes people can't be taught to have a good eye. It's not up to me. You have to kind of make that determination. Design something and ask some friends for feedback or your author group. And they might go like, there's these elements that are good. A lot of times, if you can catch me in one of like the Facebook author groups, I'm in a bunch of them, and if you have a cover that you've bought an image for and you don't know how to do the typography, doing typography on a cover I can do in like 10 or 15 minutes, and I would probably just do it for you for free because it's easy, and I think people should be able to put their book out without having to spend a bunch of money. But the more complicated elements is making the image itself really pop and look good. Once you have done it a bunch, it's a lot easier, but it's a learning. It's like learning any skill. Would you recommend self-publishing nonfiction books? It depends on the book. I don't have a lot of recommendations. Most self-published nonfiction books are things like self-help guides, recipe books, things like that are niche. So if it's a very niche thing, like if it's like a gluten-free cookbook, you can self-publish that and do really well, but chances are you might be able to, because that's a big thing now, you might be able to publish that on your own. I know a lot of fitness personalities have self-published cookbooks based on like their really specific macro and micronutrient diets that they recommend. They'll publish a cookbook for it. That's very niche. You're probably not going to find a publisher who wants to publish something that's like, here's a diet prep cookbook for bodybuilders. Probably not going to have that as a standalone book, but you can publish it yourself and sell a lot of copies to that niche. It just depends. Since I don't publish nonfiction really, it's a lot harder for me to comment on it. I'm a young writer, early 20s. Do you think it's easier for me to self-publish rather than find a publishing agency? In other words, will my age make it harder for me? When you query an agent, you don't have to mention your age. In fact, there's no reason to. So that won't affect it. So I wouldn't worry about that. So film girl, don't worry about being young. I don't think that'll negatively impact you. When you write a query letter, and Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America has a lot of information on how to write query letters that's free. And you don't have to be a member to get it. You can just be somebody and read the query letter and send some query letters out to some agents that rep books similar to yours. See if you can get your book repped, and if you can't, you can always self-publish it. Now, the thing is, you're not really going to find a publisher for a self-published book that's already out, unless that book's already a best-selling sensation, in which case you don't need a publisher. The only thing you might want to look at is there's some smaller publishing houses that will handle the print side. That would be the only thing. So if you really would like it to be to be traditionally published, start by querying agents, and you'll find out real quickly if your book is a fit for that. And if it's not, you can self-publish it. And these days, I don't think self-publishing a book will impact you negatively publishing a book traditionally later on. So if I decide like I want to traditionally publish a book next year or something, I can put that in my query letter. Like I have a YouTube channel with 30,000 subscribers, and I publish these books independently, and these were bestsellers in the categories at this point in time and things like that. Then that's just going to sell that I know what I'm doing. And for a publisher and an agent, that also means that like this guy's going to sell more books because he's going to promote a book that the publisher's publishing. So it's just going to be a win-win-win. So you can still sell that. You can't get a publisher to publish, in most cases, a book that's already been self-published. My wife self-publishes and seems to shift from X to Y, Radish, Kobo, etc. Any thoughts on longevity of these things? Just stick to Amazon and eat their crap. So I'll get to this when we get to some practical stuff, but you can go through something like Draft to Digital, which will just publish on everything. You can do Smashwords, which will publish on most things. So I do Amazon and Draft to Digital. Draft to Digital will publish through Amazon, but I want to manage Amazon as its own little environment. Amazon does most of the book sales, does most of my book sales. It prints the paperbacks. It does all the stuff that is the majority of my business. So I am going wide on all my books from now on. I'll talk about that in some other video. I don't have time to talk about it today, but basically a lot of the Kindle Unlimited and that kind of stuff, the profitability of that is going down due to some market reasons and changes in the market. There's no reason to just not go wide at the beginning because you're not going to sell a ton of books anyway. Or you can start with Amazon and just learn Amazon. You could do any one. So I wouldn't just stick with Amazon and eat their crap unless I had a really good reason to. If I were selling a series that's in Kindle Unlimited and very popular, if I were selling romance series or young adult romance, yeah, I'd be in Kindle Unlimited. But otherwise, I'd consider other options too. What can I do about my perfectionism? Not only does it slow the writing process, but it makes me doubt whether what I have written is good enough. First of all, you got to finish a manuscript and you got to put it out. You got to have other people look at it. I'm in England. Is that okay? England's great. I hope you guys leave the EU. But it looks like Parliament's trying to not do that. Nothing wrong with being in England. England's great. And yes, you can publish. So if you're in Europe, usually what'll happen is you'll have either one publisher that does both in two distinct houses, one for Europe, one for North America, or you'll have separate publishers for both that you have to negotiate. So this is a technical thing. If you're going through Amazon, it doesn't matter where. If you publish it through Amazon.com, it'll go to Amazon.co.uk, Amazon.co.dk. So it'll go to Germany, Netherlands, France, England, Ireland, Wales. It'll go to the United States, Canada, Amazon.ca. It'll go to Australia.co.au. It'll go to Japan. And I get royalties from every single country. I don't have to publish on each country's platform. I just go through Amazon and it just goes to all of those other ones too. However, I do get paid in the currency. So I get paid in yen when I sell something in Japan, which is a little weird. And then I get paid in euros. And then I lose some of that with conversion and stuff. It's kind of weird how it works, but you don't need to worry about all that. Finishing the manuscript is the first goal, right? Yes. Even if the book is repetitive or sucks in parts, you can always fix it in editing. If you've never finished a manuscript, that needs to be your main goal because that will build your confidence in ways that you don't understand. Even if it sucks, you got to understand most people never finish a book when they try to write it. They give up because it's hard and they lose confidence in themselves. But if you finish it and it sucks, the first time you do something, you're probably going to suck at it, but it can always be edited and you can always do the next one better. So yeah, first thing to do is finish it. And then hey, I can finish a book. And so when you choose to write another book, you already know that you can finish a book. It's not a big deal. So after you do the first one, everything else comes easier and you have a lot more to do. And you can get more excited about editing and publishing because you're working towards your goals. You're making it better. All right. So before I go, I'm going to tell you some things that you should always avoid when it comes to self-publishing. First one is vanity publishers, which are not self-publishing, but people get duped into them. Like I said, you either are publishing independently or you are going through a traditional publisher in which you will need an agent if you're publishing fiction. You will not be talking to a publisher directly. No publisher will ask you for money. Publishers pay you money, they don't ask you for money. If they're asking you for money, big alarm bells should go off. You're dealing with a vanity publisher. Never pay a publisher money. I'm going to repeat that. Never pay a publisher money ever. That is not how the game works. You get paid on the back end. You don't pay up front. Unless you're hiring these services and you're publishing it and you make all the money on the back end. If somebody is becoming your publisher, that is a big bad thing that you don't want to do because not only are they not going to do anything for your book, what they'll do is they'll take $5,000 from you. They'll put out a book with a crappy cover that they've said they've edited that isn't edited. All of these houses work the same way. Virtually all of them, I should say. So don't hire vanity publishers. Don't hire someone that wants your money to publish your book. That is not how it works. They'll take your money, however much it is. Sometimes it's $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. And then they will basically do nothing for you. Your book will be on Amazon. They won't promote it. They won't advertise it. If you want to advertise it, you have to spend more money through them for them to promote it. So they just keep eating your money. You're never going to see return on that. And they have the publishing rights to your book. So you can't publish it. You can't bail out and publish it yourself. They can sue you for copyright violation because they own the publishing rights to your book. You sign them over. So never sign up your publishing rights unless you're dealing with an agent and traditional publisher and they are paying you in advance or are guaranteeing you a percentage of royalties after the fact. So never, never, never pay money up front for someone to publish a book. That is something that you need to avoid. But I bring this up because if you're new to this and you haven't had someone explain how the business works, it's real easy to Google, how do I publish my book? And the first thing that'll come up will be a vanity publisher that's going to want to take your money and do this. They're very good at operating SEO. Their business is extremely shady. They're very good at duping people out of their money and fleecing authors who are new to the game, fleecing people who are inexperienced in this particular business. And it's not to say anything negative about you if you've gotten duped by this. People get duped by this stuff every day. I had a really, really, I'm going to read it to you. I had a very, very heartbreaking comment that I got on a video I made about vanity publishers a couple days ago, and I'm gonna find it real quick and just read it because it was kind of heartbreaking to read this particular comment. I have so many comments on my YouTube channel; it's hard for me to look it up again. I'll see if I can find it and read it for you guys. There's like 1,000 comments on this Chad video, so I have to get through all of those to try to find it. Okay. My dad wrote his first book, and I'm not going to mention the book because I don't want anyone to be embarrassed. We were new to this thing, so we didn't know anything about this. We got an email from Dorrance Publishing, and they said that they were really interested. We agreed to print the book. They demanded $6,000, so we paid them all we had and hoped the book will sell well, and also we thought all publishers demand money at the start. But now we are stuck here with no sales. If only I had seen this earlier, I would have stopped my dad. Please help me out with any advice. So once that happens, you're kind of screwed. And it's heartbreaking for me to read stuff like that because this person, his dad was from India. And so he wasn't involved in any kind of culture of writers in America or in the English language. I didn't have a lot of this stuff spelled out for him. And so he just got taken. $6,000 to someone who lives in India is a gargantuan sum of money, unless you're in the very upper caste. And a lot of these companies have no problem just taking every cent that somebody has in a third world country to put their book on Amazon without doing any kind of editing or copy editing. And I went and looked this book up, and it's like this publisher did nothing for these people, and it's really heartbreaking. So never use vanity publishers. There's no reason to. You can piecemeal out all the services that they sell and probably get a better deal through them, through other people. Just don't do it. All right, let me answer any questions, and then I got to peace out. Because I'm 20 minutes over. All of these go long, but I like to answer the questions. Who knows how Brexit's going to go? If you have the current parliament, then you'll get Brexit, but you'll have to switch to the euro or something crazy. Like the idea that you have to ask permission to leave some extra national political entity is absurd. That's a defiance of the nature of realism, a political philosophy called realism, that countries are sovereign. So you're basically like the MPs are basically saying that the United Kingdom is not a sovereign country. That they can't just say like, well, we're leaving the EU. Bye. It's over. It's done. Contract over. Late. If you're a sovereign country, you should be able to do what you want. It's nonsense. If the United States wanted to leave the UN, they could. If they wanted to leave, any of those, NAFTA, they could. You can just leave it. Sovereign country. Okay. How does one make a mischievous main characters work out well? Is witty dialogues and a deep story enough? Witty dialogue is a big one, but a mischievous main character is one who's very able to exploit opportunity. So if you have a kind of a bad boy character, the bad boy gets tempted to do some bad things. Like if you have mischievous school kids, you could play a prank on the teacher. Depending on how mischievous you want them to be, they'll put a whoopee cushion on the teacher's chair, or they'll put LSD in the teacher's drink, and just have that urban legend going. They'll do mischievous things. They'll get away with things. So if you write a good plot where there's an opportunity for them to get away with stuff, that's a mischievous character, and witty dialogue does help. What's your opinion on inkit.com? I have no opinion because I won't use it. So my opinion is I don't use it, and that probably is more significant than any other opinion I could tell you about that. I don't use it, and I won't use it. I could be more specific, but I just don't really need to. There's no reason to use it. I would just do normal things. So I guess that's about it for today. This will be the last time you see this backdrop, by the way. I think I might put out a video if I can, like tomorrow or Saturday, because I'm moving. I sold my house. I'm moving to a different house. So the studio is going away. The studio where I recorded my last album, where I've done all these videos, all this stuff's going away. I'm going to a new house where I will have to build a new studio, and I have a space in mind to do that. But we need to make a move. This house, we bought it before we had kids. It has a lot of stairs. It has 3 levels, and we have little kids. So we have another kid on the way. So we will have 2 kids. We have 1 kid, we will have little kids. Let's be clear. So once we had the second kid on the way, it's like we got to get out of the house with the stairs. We have a big pool in the back that can't be fenced off because there's all these different levels around it where you could just walk around the fence. So we decided to move and get a different house. And the different house is going to be really cool. I think it's going to work out well for my studio. I'm going to have to do some soundproofing. I'm going to miss my wood paneled walls. You guys can't really see. I don't really show the front here, but I want to grab this camera. Maybe you can see the only thing that's not wood paneled really is the ceiling. So I have wood paneling all the way around. I have my cords hanging. This is a diffusion stuff with my lighting. It's a really cheap setup, but it looks pretty good. I look pretty good on it. So I'll be looking to do all that. So anyway, thanks guys. Thanks so much for watching. Hard sell. Join my mailing list, dvspress.com/list. My next book, because of this move and because I realize I may not have internet for a while after this move. You may not see another video for a while, and I may not be able to distribute the book that I'm writing early to people. So that may have to wait till 2019. I really wanted to have it out by Christmas, but I'm looking, it's December 5th. There's still a lot of work to be done on the book. I don't think Christmas is going to happen, but I do have a new book coming out probably January, and then I have 2 more that I've written that I finished this year that I wanted to sideline a bit to take a break and then come back for editing because they need more work in that editing phase. And so I'll probably have those in 2019 as well. And that's basically what's going on for next year. And yes, I hope the move goes well too. And thanks so much for showing up. Please don't get fleeced. Have a lot of caution with stuff. Remember those 4 principles. 4 principles are investment principle. What's your ROI? Skin in the game. Is the person selling it have skin in the game, or they have no skin in the game? 3, the necessity principle. How necessary is this thing? And 4, what are the alternatives? If you ask that for each service that somebody's trying to sell you, you'll be better off. And notice I don't sell any services other than show up and have content and chat with me. So I don't sell any editing services. I don't want skin in your game. I'm not going to give you advice. Notice the people who give advice on who to pick as an editor, they always sell editing services. Built into it is this belief that you should have an editing service because they themselves sell it. They themselves sell editing. Likewise, if you talk to an author that buys editing, there's a psychic need for them to want to have other people buy the same service because they paid for it. They don't want to feel like they're being duped. But you should have a lot of caution with a lot of those services if you're going to publish independently. So have a good one, and I will see you guys next time.